Hey everyone, my name is Peter. I'm a program manager in the Windows Virtual Desktop team, and today we're going to talk about all the latest updates to Windows Virtual Desktop. We actually have a ton, so why don't we just jump in? Now, the first thing that we're going to talk about is Defender for Endpoint support. Let's quickly touch upon what Defender for Endpoint actually is. Now, you probably have heard that the security landscape is changing. And with that, we also need to make sure that Windows or pretty much all our devices are secured more. Historically, we could get away with traditional just antivirus. Bad people or bad actors that would just create malware, and we would collect signatures, and based on those signatures, we would distribute those to customers, and they would benefit from the added protection. What we're seeing now is that for your run-of-the-mill malware, that still is sufficient and it's great and something you'll need. But for more advanced and more targeted attacks, that no longer applies. Especially if it's targeted, it means that specific malware or specific sequences of events are targeted to a specific account. And then that no longer works. The traditional finding malware, creating signatures, distributing those doesn't work. Instead, what we're looking at is behavior. And Defender for Endpoint is exactly what that's doing, and it's very good at it. I'll give you an example. Let's imagine you work in Outlook and all of a sudden Outlook starts downloading a file. That turns out to be a port scanner, maybe through PowerShell, for example, and it starts port scanning devices that are on your network. And then all of a sudden it starts to reach out to those clients that it just port scanned. Now, out of these events, working in Outlook, downloading a file, port scanning, reaching out to other devices, none of this has to be malicious. But the sequence of it together makes it very suspicious. And that's where Defender for Endpoint can generate an alert to inform you that maybe something's happening on your network and you should look into it and take action. Now, historically, last year, we had multi-session in public preview, which means that you could host up to 25 users on one multi-session VM while it was enrolled in Defender for Endpoint. Recently, we announced that this is now GA, and you can host up to 50 users on one VM. This was actually because we had to make some changes to the UI, the portal of Defender for Endpoint, because it wasn't optimized to host so many users to list the amount of users on one VM. And then there were some other changes that are made to the client, the agent, as part of Defender for Endpoint. And we're actively looking to see if we can even remove that 50 user cap. But for now, 50 users is the cap for the majority of the scenarios and the majority of conversations I had with partners and customers. That's more than sufficient. So let me walk you through what the experience is like. So here I am in the Azure portal, and I open up a new tab, and I'm going to browse to the Security Center. So this is where you as an IT admin can see what kind of events are being generated. And when I go into the menu options, I can actually see what kind of devices I have enrolled. I can also see that I have right now one alert. So if I look at the devices, you can see that I have one device called TD-0 with a medium alert. So something happened. You can see the platform is Windows 10 WVD, which means Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session. Now I can do a couple of things from here. What I personally like to do is go to the alert queue, and here you can find all the recent alerts, and you'll find information about what actually happened. And you can, of course, click on one of these events and drill down and get a tree of what kind of processes were executed in which sequence. You get all kinds of information about why we generated this alert. The other option you have available is go into automated investigation, where we can automate remediation as well. Now, in this case, that's not necessary, but you can fully automate the remediation so that you no longer have to take manual steps in order to get a device back into a healthy state. So this has been quite an investment from our side. And so far, the feedback has been pretty positive. Our customers like the investments we're doing. And we hope that you will kick the tires as well with this new investment. So with that, let's move over to the next topic. And that's all about service metadata. It's another highly requested feature. By default, if you create a host pool, the metadata used to be stored in the US, regardless of where you decided to deploy your workload. So even if you had a subscription where you deployed your VMs in maybe Europe, the metadata about the service that we need in order to function was always hosted in the US. Now, for obvious reasons, maybe compliance or more like regulated industries, they require all the metadata to be in the geo of their choice as well. So that's another thing that we currently have in preview, which means that you have the ability to select the Europe region. So just to show you what that looks like, if I go to my subscriptions, here you can see my subscription. And right now, it's something that we have to enable. So if you go into the resource providers, this is just a one-step operation. You search for Microsoft Desktop Virtualization, and you hit the re-register button just once. You don't get any feedback, but it does work. So this is because it's in public preview right now. Next, if you go into create a host pool, and I'm sure you've seen this before, now you can already see that the metadata, it mentions it under the location, will be stored in East US. Now that's not something new because we could already do that. But now if you pick a different location, and the one that's in preview right now is Europe. So if you pick the Europe location, you can see that the metadata will also be stored in that specific geo. So right now we have the US and Europe, but that's not where we stop. We'll add more geos in the next coming months. So again, this is hopefully an unblocker for some of those customers out there that need to make sure or ensure that their metadata is stored in the same geo or the geo of their choice. With that, we're going to move on to the next topic, which is RDP ShortPath. The way Windows Virtual Desktop works, on top of Windows, a small agent is installed, which creates an outbound connection to our management plane. Whenever you connect up to Azure, and we tie the connection together, and you have a connection to your host pool and your virtual machine. Now, this has some great benefits, especially from a security perspective. You don't have to open any inbound ports, which is great. But since it relies on TCP, we can only do this with TCP, it also has downsides. Sometimes UDP is more performant, is better in terms of latency. So what we've worked on is RDP ShortPath, and that allows you to establish a direct connection to the host pool and the VM that you're connected to. Initially, the initial connection will still go through our management plane, and once the authentication, etc., is done successfully, then the peer-to-peer connection will be established, and you can leverage UDP as well. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Now, this is a lot of the feature that's truly under the covers. So there's not a lot to see from an end user perspective, but let me show you one way you could potentially demo this. So here I'm connecting to my high secure LOB, and I'm sure you've seen it before. And if I look at the experience monitor, here I'm actually getting a notification that it might be slow. I'm connected using TCP. It says you might have experiencing issues. So instead, here I've changed my setup to use RDP ShortPath. And what you'll see is once I'm connected, that same awesome application is opened. And when I go into the experience monitor, this time I see that UDP is enabled. So here I have, after the initial authentication, I can have a direct channel between my endpoint and the virtual machine up in Azure. It does require you to open up an inbound port, but from a latency perspective and performance perspective, it can be a lot better. All right, moving on to the next topic. So let's talk about MSIX app attach. And I know that we already had a bunch of sessions around this, so I'll keep this brief. Let's just dive into a demo straight away. So here I am again in the Azure portal, and you can see that I have a bunch of MSIX packages already. There's 3 of them at this point. Now, what I'm going to do is go to my application groups, and here you'll find that I have a few applications already assigned. Microsoft To Do, Simple Edit, and Zoom. So what we're going to do is authenticate to a virtual machine and see what the end user experience is like, and see if we actually have these applications in the start menu. And here you go, we have Microsoft To Do. So what happened in the background is that we have an MSIX package which lives on a Azure Files file share. And whenever the user logs on, we can just mount that application or attach the application, I should say, and it shows up in the start menu. It's a very elegant solution. Now let's imagine if we want to add, in this case, Edge. So we're going to make the package active, and next we're going to add the application itself. So here we go. We're just going to assign it an application name as well, Microsoft Edge Dev. And then once we assign this, we go back into the virtual machine and re-authenticate, which is a requirement right now, and see if the application is now available to the end user. Here you'll see that Microsoft Edge just magically appeared in the start menu. And as you can tell, I actually used a video from Stefan, who is the real SME, the subject matter expert. I think he delivered great work. And right now, MSIX App Attach is in public preview. And we hope that it will go GA as soon as possible. Let's move on. Now let's take a look at all the improvements we've done in the Azure portal. And there's a few. So let's start with the separation of the local VM admin and domain admin credentials. So let me show you a quick demo. Here we are in the create a host pool flow. And previously you had one set of credentials. So for both the local VM and the domain AD, and now they're separate. So this hasn't changed. The first part, you still have to enter your AD credentials. So these will be used to domain join the virtual machine to your traditional domain. And then second, you can have a local account being created on all the hosts in the pool. So this set of credentials will only have access to those local host pools. So now you can separate the two. Obviously, you can also just reset or remove or delete the account that's being used locally on the virtual machines. It's totally up to you. Now, for those of you who are familiar with availability sets and zones, it's a great way to make your WVD environment even more resilient. You can protect against compute failures. Previously, this was automatically enabled, and it had some limitations. You could only create up to 200 VMs at the same time. And we got clear feedback from customers and partners saying they want to change this throughout the creation of VMs. So we've changed a couple of things. Here in this create host pool flow, once you've chosen the VM, now you have the availability to select an availability zone. And if you choose to do so, the managed disk will be created in the same zone as your virtual machine. And you can optionally specify an availability set to ensure that while you have either planned or unplanned maintenance events, that at least one VM will be available and you will meet the 99.95 Azure SLA. The availability set of the VM cannot be changed once it's created. And when you create an availability set, you can configure default domains and update the domains as well, as you can see over here. And VMs in the same fault domain, they all share a common power source and physical network switch. So VMs in the same update domain will be restarted together during planned maintenance. And finally, you can choose no infrastructure redundancy if you do not wish your VMs to be in an availability set or zone. So let's talk about a couple of the changes that we made in terms of informing users or logging off users. So there's a few investments here. One is we can now select which user is supposed to receive a message. So just as a test, we're going to assign or we're going to send this message to user 1. And as you can imagine, the end user experience is exactly what you expect. Only this user will get a message. Now, if we send a slightly different message to 2 users, the result is exactly, again, what you would expect. So instead of just test user 1 getting the message, the second user will also be receiving that same message. So this allows you to just either select all users or a sub-selection of just a few and customize the message depending on your needs. Now, if we go back into the Azure portal, the other thing you can do, very similar, is instead of selecting all users, select one and then log off a user. Now, what we see this happen quite a bit is first you send them a message, a heads up saying, hey, we're going to log you off. And then after a while, you actually do this. And as you can see, if we refresh, we can see that this user is now no longer logged on. So you have much more granular way of controlling the messaging to given users, but also logging off. So here we're looking at our session hosts. We have two. As you can see, drain mode is switched to off on one of them and has two active users logged on. What we can do now is we can select both of the session hosts and then turn on the drain mode if we want to. And just to tie in with the previous topic that we talked about, you can drill down into one session host and get more information about what kind of users or which users are connected and take action based on that. So here we can see that we have the same two test users logged on. And if we select test user one, we can log off that user. And as you would expect, the amount of sessions will eventually drop. This takes a little while. We can see that the end user actually gets a notification that your admin might have ended your session. And if they want, they can reconnect. But as you can tell, the amount of sessions now was dropped to 1. And again, this now gives you the option to select one, several, or all session hosts in a pool to turn on drain mode at the same time. Now, very quickly, two other features which have been added to the portal recently. You can now multi-select multiple session hosts and then decide to remove them. So here we're going to hit the remove button. And of course, we get a prompt making sure to confirm you don't want to remove session hosts by accident. So if we agree this is a good idea, we'll hit remove. And here you'll see that we'll remove all of the session hosts as part of your selection. So the multi-select option is new. The other thing is also by request is having the option to see what kind of WVD agent is installed on a given session host. So here you can see that we have an additional column which allows you to see which version is installed. But also if we drill down to the session host itself, we now have a field that populates the WVD agent version. Again, if you want to troubleshoot, if you want to know if you have the most recent agent installed, it's a lot easier to determine right now. Let's move on to a separate topic. So let's talk about the Windows Virtual Desktop offer. No demos, this is just one slide, and I'll talk through some of the key points here. So one of the things we launched at the beginning of this calendar year is a new offering for new Windows Virtual Desktop customers, and they can save 30% of all compute costs in specific series. So specifically the D and the B series for up to 90 days. And this is available to all customers that are deploying Windows Virtual Desktop natively, so not the ones extended by Citrix or VMware. The activation must occur in Q1 of this calendar year, and we might extend the offer, but for now that's what it is. And this has to be the commercial cloud, so it cannot be any of the government clouds, for example. And it's currently scoped or limited to one subscription per billing scope. So those are eligible for the promotion. So hopefully this will help as well for those new customers that want to kick the tire, want to try WVD to allow them to trial the solution with an additional discount. We've also worked on monitoring. So right now in public preview, we have Azure Monitor for Windows Virtual Desktop. And this runs on top of Azure Monitor workbooks, and it gives you a full 360-degree view of the health of your WVD environment. It allows an IT admin to see specific diagnostics, connection performance, resource utilization, errors and alerts, host pool density, and much more. If you're interested, go check out our public doc pages, and we'll show you how you can set up the monitoring and how you can troubleshoot in case you run into issues. Now, there's one more thing I'd like to talk about, which is the WVD Specialty Certification. Now, we've all seen more people working from home, So we're shifting to more remote work, and that's something which we all believe that will continue to happen in the near future. Now, that also means that we have an increased amount of administrators that need to be a subject matter expert in planning and delivering and just managing virtual desktops. And if this is of interest to you or someone within your organization, please inform them about the upcoming Windows Virtual Desktop Specialty Certification. So that's coming up later this month, so later in March. There is a requirement to pass an exam called AZ-140. If you're interested in this program, check out the link you can see on the slide. That will lead you to a tech community post which explains more about when to expect what and how you can prepare in advance. So with that, we've reached the end of this presentation. Thank you so much for attending. We went through a long list of all new capabilities. Just to look at the list we went through, we talked about Windows Defender for Endpoint. We talked about metadata, RDP ShortPath, Start VM on Connect, MSIX app attach, a bunch of the portal updates, the WVD offering, the monitoring solution, and then the last topic we talked about is the WVD specialization certificate. So hopefully this was a good use of your time. Again, thanks for watching. And please follow me on Twitter if you like. Sometimes I'd like to share some of the nitty-gritty details about, what else is coming, or maybe some of the inner workings, for example, Windows and how we made that better for virtualization purposes. So if that's stuff that you like, please think about or consider following me. So with that, again, thanks for your time, and I'm sure we'll talk soon. Bye.